and welcome to You Are Medicine. I'm your host, Thuy, and this show is on creativity and healing. With my patients in my clinical practice, I've noticed that the area of creative expression is a much neglected topic of health and healing. While exercise and diet are common associations people make with health, creative expression isn't quite so understood or taken seriously as integral to our wellness. So I set out to shed some light on creativity and the creative process, hoping to inspire, give permission, and encourage all of us to be at ease in expressing ourselves in any way that feels healing, life-affirming, and joyful. In this show, I interview creatives from very different backgrounds who offer different expressions of creativity. The first person I interviewed is an art professor at the University of Santa Cruz, Jennifer Parker. She's also the co-founder and director of the Open Lab Research Center, a place that facilitates innovative, creative, and collaborative research with art, community design, technology, and science. Jennifer showed me her basement studio, where there was a spectacular world of seaweed harvested for art and science.
This is like sea lettuce here.
That's familiar.
This one here's a smaller version of it.
Ooh. So my focus on this program is on creativity and healing, and I feel like a lot of people are constipated because the idea of art and what they think it is intimidating. Our culture sort of emphasizes right, wrong, and perfectionism and all that so much that I feel like people are afraid to play, which is, right, the beginning of art.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see your stuff, I can see that you've done this a long time. You've given yourself lots of permission. You can have a vision, but you also have enough experience to know how to execute something like that. You know, like people have ideas and there's all this stagnation or fear or intimidation. And in my work, I'm always trying to encourage people towards more creativity because for my own life, it's very healing, like this play. And it's interesting to me to talk to creatives where it's like, you're just doing your thing.
I know, and so many layers there of what you're saying, because like when I first started teaching, I was very young, I was 28, 29. And the first class that I taught was this giant lecture hall and at UC Santa Cruz, and it was 3D foundation and introducing people to sculpture and the history of sculpture. And this is pre-digital, right? Mm-hmm. So I would go to the library and I would check out slides, and every time I went to check out slides, there were very few women, like 0 women sculptors, like they didn't exist, right? So I put together these slideshow and try to like highlight the 1 or 2. And so I said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to just do a kind of performative thing and show a bunch of slides and then do a Q&A halfway through the talk and say, hey, what did you guys think? What was missing? Right. And somebody said, oh, wire or glass art or all of these things. And only one person said women. At that point, I was like, first of all, we've just removed the sort of history of craft and making and this idea that it was kind of art was a male-dominated thing. Mm-hmm. And then students said, well, I didn't even know there were still artists. I thought that's what museums were for, right? So we built this culture of a kind of elite people make art.
Yes.
And within the museum culture, very few women make art and who make it into the museums, right? So I think you're kind of it's bred into youth culture as something that isn't. You do your art making practice in elementary school or what have you, but it's not something to be taken to the next level because those masters are dead and dying. Like they don't exist anymore. That was from the past. And it really was heartbreaking for me to think that we don't see that like the doctors, like the teachers, like the bakers, this role of the artist in society had sort of been erased by the commerce that was connected to it, because the fewer people you have, fewer collectors can collect, and so the value goes up. And so it created this market-driven approach to making art. And Hollywood did the same thing with film, right? Tons of women were early filmmakers, and then it just kind of got taken over by men in these smaller venues that then were able to commodify it in a way. So that's, for me, that's the tragedy of it. But I also sit in this super privileged position where my job is to make art, talk art, create art, publish art, research art.
Jennifer discussed the heavily male-dominated and market-driven nature of art in the art world. I suspect it is also a very white world, although we didn't get around to talking about that. Here we have systems of patriarchy, capitalism, and probably a racially biased system defining for us what is valid and worthwhile in the world of art. Entry and reward in that world is a sort of privilege, as Jennifer recognizes. And yet, as she spoke, I thought about the privilege that she recognizes, and I wondered if the idea of privilege itself is part of the same system that defines for us what is art. Hidden in the notion of privilege is a presumption of what is desirable. Privilege is having special access to something that everyone wants. But what if I don't find value in being part of a system that defines art in such narrow, exclusive terms? What if I recognize other ways of being and the creative value in myself and those who seem invisible to the prevailing systems? To me, it feels more of a privilege to be part of an inclusive, generous, life and community affirming way of living. Sebastian Snow speaks to the experience of not being able to fit into the current systems and how that forces creative expression. Sebastian is a young, queer person of color, writer, and artist. Sebastian is also a brilliant thinker, and I'm not just saying that because Sebastian is my very own child.
So do you think everybody's creative?
I think everyone has the capacity for creativity, but I don't think that everyone is able to understand that part of themselves.
How come?
Because we live in a world that restricts us in many different ways, and it can be hard to break out of that restriction. Being creative does not benefit everyone. You know, sometimes it won't help them to be creative. At least in their mind, it won't help them to be creative, right? It's not going to come out, and they don't need it to come out. And I think for a lot of creative people, or at least myself, our creativity stems from the fact that we just it's not even that it benefits us. It's just that it's not a matter of saying no to it. And I think that's why a lot of marginalized people are drawn to creativity inherently. Because when you can't say no to parts of your identity that intrinsically fall outside the norm, then what's the point in even trying to conform to the boundaries of what is creative and what's not creative? If you yourself are seen outside of existing systems.
Who creates the expectations of life or success that dissuades people from creative thinking?
I don't know. It's like asking who controls racism, you know? There's people that began the process of it. You can trace it back to a thought. And then there's the history of how it builds. And there's the kind of practice that if we all believe in it, then it's just going to get more and more reinforced. So if we all believe that this is how we should experience life, then it doesn't matter if there's one person with more power, more control, because we're all just kind of allowing ourselves into it. And I don't want to have that discredit. I'm sure CEOs in ways the government and, all these people in power, they do have a huge influence over how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the world. I'm not trying to dissuade that, but I don't think it's as simple as we can blame everything on one force, because I think it's a conditional act after hundreds of years of history pushing us to this one ideal where we slowly begin to accept that and enable ourselves towards it.
Do you feel like you have to willfully, consciously not succumb to that? Or
yeah, I think I need to willfully, consciously succumb to my shortcomings, I think more. I think I need to actually succumb to how I'm being influenced by the systems more than how I'm not being influenced by the systems. Because my first response is never to conform, and that's not a choice. That's just, I think I've honestly worked harder to try to exist within systems than I've tried to work harder to get myself out of systems. I think my inherent default is just like, I don't understand what's going on, and I don't want to belong to any sort of shared system. But I think what I've needed to work on is I've obviously still lived inside a very biased and cultured community. And so I need to examine where I've been impacted by that, especially because I've grown up in a racist community. I've grown up in a patriarchal community where most of the values are placed on things that I don't think should determine value. And I think I've needed to unravel the ideas that I have around what makes a person valuable, what makes a person important.
Sebastian brings up profound points, reflecting on how systems affect shared notions of what makes a person valuable, what makes a person important. It feels basic and also so crucial because if we don't examine our collective presumptions about what is worthwhile, then we may be unconsciously sizing ourselves up to what we think a creative person or an artist is, and by comparison, deny ourselves access to our own creative capacity. Maybe that's what makes us feel so self-conscious and vulnerable when we attempt to be creative. I talked to the artist Debbie Huey, the author of the popular comic series Bumper Boy, about this.
So are most of the people who are involved in comics, do they have a background in fine arts like you? Or is it like anybody, everybody, self-taught? How do they come to it usually?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think, a lot of people do have art degrees, it seems like.
Yeah.
It's just the neat thing about comics is that you don't really need much. You really just have to have stories in your head and a piece of paper and pencil.
Yeah.
That's another neat thing about it. It's very accessible to just start. Even if you feel like you don't have drawing skills, plenty of comic book artists, successful ones who don't have the greatest illustration skills, still quite successful. As long as you can convey a story, it can be successful.
I think you can say that, and I think it's hard for people to really feel that possibility, you know? I feel like most people have a blockage towards expressing themselves in any creative way because it's vulnerable to say that.
Yeah, I could see that. I see it all the time. I mean, especially, when adults come to me and like, I wish I could draw like you, I wish I just, they express that they wish they could do it. And then I'll rebut with, well, you can, you can try. The cost to get in is a piece of paper and a pencil, and to just start doodling. And it's not going to be easy to get to the results that you want, but you can practice.
Right.
And if you really want it, you'll find ways to learn.
Mm-hmm.
When I work at the library, I'm lucky enough to be able to incorporate the art background stuff. So I'll teach comic classes or little mini drawing classes at the library. And oftentimes it'll be to kids. And it's so easy. It's so easy to tell kids to put a piece of, get a piece of paper and draw some lines, and they'll be happy with whatever they put down. It's so easy for them. And how come it's so easy for kids to do it? And then adults are like afraid for their life to like even pick up the pencil. They can't even pick up the pencil. They're like, no thanks.
What do you think it is?
I think most of the time they're just like, no, I'm not good at that and it's going to look terrible. That's usually the reaction. And it's like, so, I come out with terrible drawings all the time too.
It was funny to hear Debbie describe the fear of putting pencil to paper like a fear for your life. And yet, I think to some degree, we are all familiar with that feeling. It feels so vulnerable. We have been conditioned by larger systems for sure, and perhaps reinforced within smaller systems of education, religion, family to do the right and appropriate thing. We are so afraid to do something poorly, to make mistakes, that we can't allow ourselves to play or be creative. And it's here that I think it would benefit our health and well-being if we can somehow find a way to allow for that part of ourselves. One of the most creative people I know is my friend, filmmaker Paul Wang. I sat down to talk with him about the importance of creativity in our lives and some factors that may be blocking it.
So many people come to me and I'll say, let's do this together. They'll say, I can't draw. That's the first thing they'll say. And they'll keep saying it. And even though I actually can't draw, I can draw circles, but the point is not to be able to draw. I think there's a very, very basic part of us, maybe not as basic as breathing and eating, but right after that, that knows how to create. It is an essential part of their being to create. And that creation doesn't have to be visual art. It could be dancing or singing. You can be dressing up as a normal part of life. I think that my purpose, if there is a purpose, is to show the people that are close to me, or people that I can get a grant from, or a museum, that play is so integral to your being. And you were just told not to do it by the culture, but you need that play that you needed at 6th grade. And if you don't have that, you're locking down at some sort of freedom. So some people will meditate for freedom, or some people will take walks for freedom. They'll do healthy things, they'll do whatever. But creativity is essential, I think, to that process because it's so much a part of who you are.
Why? I mean, clearly there's many existing people who don't feel creative at all. They're living a life.
I think because they've been told not to be creative. They've been told, like, that's not going to make money. That isn't really a thing. That isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like when you create, you make necklaces or you do your art and crafts, is it essential? If I said tomorrow, they asked me to tell you, just not do those things, what would you tell them?
I cannot do those specific things, but I can't not express who I am. I'll find ways. I mean, I feel like creativity for me is self-expression, and you can take all those things that you think are art away and you can make me not do it. But I feel like, even my next word is a creative expression.
Yeah, writing, radio shows.
What I choose to
do. It's extremely creative, right? But then what would be the point of telling you not to do these things I just mentioned, but then if it's just going to leak out to somebody else, then why? Well, I'm wasting my time with you.
That's my question.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm observing in practice. I think it's leaking out in people, and it's because I know what creativity is, that I can kind of game the system, and I'll let it leak out in other ways. But for people who don't understand that, it's leaking out in addiction. It's leaking out in whatever else, right? Because there's an energy that wants to be expressed, but you're feeling repressed.
There's a perversion or like of health by tricking yourself into doing this other activity, like addiction.
Yourself in this other activity, and also it's very disempowering to make people believe that art or creativity is something they have to learn or it's something that is inaccessible. It's very debasing of a person because the mere existence of a person is self-expression.
Yeah, you put it well, yeah.
And I think for me, like you, it's so important for me to also reframe creativity in art and give people permission, not even permission, you actually can't help it, but you're doing all these things because you don't understand what it is that your heart wants.
Right. Yeah. Creativity is kind of discouraged in many ways, and that's why people are so searching for something, in their middle age. I think that there was this heavy feeling that I was doing something wrong or something. And I think, what happens is, even with my own parents, one of who was an artist, was that in elementary school, we were like, why aren't you playing? Go play, don't stop playing. That is so valuable. And then in middle school, somewhere in middle school, they're like, okay, that was great, but you need to stop. You need to be serious. What does that mean, serious? That means you need to have purpose. purpose you need to have is something, to be useful. And then as you go through high school, I never knew what I wanted to do. My kids knew, but I didn't know. I was like, well, what do you want me to do? So I think in high school, you're building your career to be useful. And then you go to college to be useful. You get married to be useful. Like there's all this idea of being useful. And then that's what a midlife crisis is.
Oh.
Maybe. Yeah, not exactly for me, because I didn't have that. I think it's because we don't value creativity. We do value it in the very extremes, like if Yo-Yo Ma play a concert, you're like, but if it's yourself, I think it's too much. It's like, well, I can't be Yo-Yo Ma. But just the mere expression of art feels indulgent, unless you're going to be Yo-Yo Ma, which, most of us cannot be. Even professional cellists cannot be Yo-Yo Ma.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can't achieve that level of expression, then it has no value. Yo-Yo Ma, I assume, he can make a living from what he does. People regard his work with his best cellist almost ever. And that anyone who just plays the cello is like, well, you're never going to be Yo-Yo Ma.
That isn't Yo-Yo Ma playing. That's Joan, my patient. I've been seeing Joan for the last couple years, treating her elbows and fingers so she can continue to play the cello. I talked to her about this radio program and that I was trying to encourage people to be more creative in their lives because we are restricted by feelings of vulnerability and fear. And she told me something that I will never forget. She asked me, "Do you know what amateur means?" The way she asked it so intently, I figured there was another meaning other than my association with the word, meaning beginner, rusty, not good enough, unprofessional. She told me it means lover, someone who does something because they love it. I was stunned. I am admittedly an amateur at many things, and now I feel proud of it. To be a lover, to do something out of love. And that is exactly why I do what I do, out of love. If I repressed my amateur activities, that feeling of love and expression for any reason, I would be suppressing my life force, and life would be lackluster. If I sought validation or approval from a system that couldn't recognize the value of my love or discredit me, then I might stop doing what I'm doing. But I do what I do not for validation from systems that do not value me, or even for money. By the way, amateur means doing something for the love of it, and professional means doing something for money. But I do what I do for love, and doing that gives its own reward because it's enjoyable, like play, and that should be its own reason. Melody Kopp, a ceramic artist and a patient of mine who inspired this show, loves making ceramics. She talks about her love for this art form and why it's so essential to her well-being.
I remember when you came into acupuncture, and I don't even remember what we were talking about. I didn't even know that you're a ceramic artist. We were talking about something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to talk about your art, and your eyes watered up.
Yeah, I started crying. yeah, which I'm almost on the verge now. But,
So what is that, though?
Well, I think and I probably will. When things really matter to me, it affects me. So I think it also, sometimes it even happens when I just step on the yoga mat, when I used to do that, and when I actually honor me and what I need in my life for my heart and my soul. Yeah, so that day when we talked, that was a really helpful day when you just talked to me and I was just talking. I think I had a really hard day gardening and stuff like that, but what frustrates me sometimes is I'll allow my work to take precedent
And like I said, once again, I love gardening this, but sometimes a lot of my work in this, that will be the thing that I do instead of art. Art I'll pull away before I do that.
Yeah.
And so now I'm trying to learn how to balance and do the art and pull away from the work as much. And so that day when I think it was just, yeah, I notice I'll cry when stuff matters to me, when matters to me inside matters to me. Like I said, heart and soul. It's just so when I'm honoring that, it seems like it's a big deal to me to let myself do that. It's like getting myself out of the way kind of thing.
Yeah.
Even finally, like in taking care of myself. I mean, that's another way of taking care of myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you feel moved like that, is there a sense of, I feel a sense of sadness about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what's?
Well, because I don't, to all the time of not allowing myself to do it and letting myself do it, or realizing how much I need to do it, to say that I forget. It's like, I don't think I ever forget. I think I just not let it affect you, suppress it a little bit. It's like letting myself honor it more and do it more. It helps. I guess it's remembering a part of who I am. It's like not forgetting who I am, because we have so many parts of us of what we can't just say I just do that or I just do. We have so many parts, and that's a big part of me to say that I'm an artist.
And things like, yeah, you might be coming for a knee, but when I see tears around a thing, I'm like, this is a much more important issue.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
To your health.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And I think the way we've compartmentalized health, people do come in and they're like, well, what's relevant? Okay, I'll tell her about the knee. But no, like, of course, the thing that you love and honoring yourself to do, giving yourself permission, that's like the ultimate health, because it's the ultimate happiness.
Yeah, because if I'm stopping myself doing it, then something's stopped up in my body, right? The body shows up, it's showing up there. That's the end of it, yeah.
Melody is now creating more art and feeling happier and healthier. But the road to giving ourselves permission can be a long, difficult one. It's not quite as easy as saying to ourselves, oh, I like doing this. Let me now do this thing that I haven't been doing for a very long time. There are reasons why we don't give ourselves permission, don't honor our longings, and more often than not, at least some, if not all those reasons, are entangled in the larger systems that we talked about earlier. The system that tells us what is worthwhile art or not, who is a worthwhile artist or not, is the same system that keeps us so busy and distracted doing other things, like trying to make a living, that we have no time or energy to do the thing we love. I explored this with Melody. Well, I really want to delve here, stay here a little while, because I feel like here's Melody, and you've had all this background and training in art, and you know that you're an artist and you're a ceramicist, and you know you love it, and you have the skill and all this stuff, and it's accessible. All you have to do is do it. What's the thing?
Yeah. What is the thing? I know, because sometimes when I think about it, or if I see other people that have gone either farther in the field with, maybe they just got into it and they're already maybe in a studio, or they're already doing this and this, and I kind of go, why didn't I? Where am I? Why is it still sort of, I'm kind of doing it, I'm kind of getting into classes, I can get to a certain level, but for me, it's always been a financial thing. It's been money or work. But once again, I mean, if I really wanted to look at it, it's been a choice too. I mean, everything I do is a choice, right? I can choose to do that. I seem to have chosen work, or I've seemed to have chosen, what do you call it? Poverty consciousness, perhaps. I'm not sure if maybe I wasn't ready to do it, but it's always been a matter for me. I've always thought it's either been time or money, work or art. And then the only time I've actually allowed myself to really do it, art, if I had maybe a little excess money, or if I was in school, or if I had a way to do it as an assistant. It was more like time. I did my work with it and I could do the time, and then I must have had enough to where I could do it okay. I don't know. Maybe it's a not good enough thing too. So maybe I'm not thinking, oh, maybe you're okay. Even when I still hear people like they like my work, or it's like I'm not looking for the compliments and that it's nice, but to kind of get the the validation, I guess, needs to come from me more. Maybe I'm ready. I'm not
You touched on quite a few points that I think about all the time, because I feel like in general, we are not creative. I think people naturally are creative. So I actually think
Yeah.
not everybody's a ceramicist or whatever, but we have our own sense of expression.
Yes, I agree.
And
Yeah.
I feel like we don't give ourselves permission for that expression
Yeah.
in little ways and in big ways if you're an artist. And in my practice, I feel like that's part of what's making us sick, actually, is that we don't give ourselves the freedom to be who we are and to express it and to feel okay with it. It's a sort of form of self-love to do that.
Yeah.
And so you touch upon, the sense of maybe I'm not good enough, and also the financial piece, I think, caught in this culture. It's like it's not worthy or worthwhile unless you can make money off of it.
I was just going there with it. I was just saying, well, what are you doing? Because we're so used to this culture of what are you doing? And instead of resting, or what are you making? Well, where's that going? Why are you making that? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we're so disconnected that actually most people don't even know what their creative expression is. You're a little bit one up because you know what you love. But for me, even having patients where they can feel some creative urge, but they don't even know where to begin or what that means, because for so long, you're just focusing on doing what you need to do to survive and also to belong. Which means you don't really want an individual expression if you want to belong.
And also they'll give themselves too much pressure. Like a lot of people think maybe they don't know what, but I don't know if I could do that, or well, if it's any good. Or I've had people say, oh my God, I love the work, and I just knit at home, or I just do cooking. I said, oh my God, I said, any form of creativity is you're creatively cooking, you're creatively making something. It doesn't have to be what quote unquote in the arts, the fine arts. It's anything that we do that I guess we enjoy or love doing, I think.
I loved that Melody tied it back to anything that we do. And I think that's an excellent place to start to reclaim our creative spirit. Let's rescue creativity from the systems that hijacked it and created definitions around it that are so out of reach and do not include most of us. Let's free creativity from the confines of lofty museums, academic institutions, and the exclusive upper echelons of society, and return it to all the places it actually dwells. Mother Nature has a creative capacity that is beyond our ability to comprehend, and that creativity lives in each of our hearts as we are part of nature. Once we acknowledge and accept our own innate creativity, then we can begin the humble process of reconnecting to it and seeing it in our very own lives, even in the smallest of ways, like how we grow a garden or arrange our furniture or make up stories for our children. Once we see it in ourselves, then we can nurture it. Jennifer discussed with me how that understanding of creativity dawned on her during the usually mundane activity of washing dishes.
I mean, for me, it's not art so much, but for me, what brings me joy is creation and giving myself permission to move in the world however I want to move in the world. And I just happen to have an aesthetic sense, and I love making things. But I mean, I think something as simple as cooking, which many people do every single day, we don't move through even the basic things with that sort of permission and aliveness. We kind of are like,
Mm-hmm. I had that realization in a moment when my daughter was probably like 5 or 6, and I was unloading the dishwasher, and I was just so pissed, so tired of this like chore of raising. I was like, oh, it didn't occur to me somehow that having kids meant a lot of dishes and cooking and cleaning. Like, I was resentful a little bit. I felt like, this is like, it's taking away from my other stuff. And then I was just like, well, what would happen if I actually brought joy to this? Not joy like, oh, the dishwasher's empty and I feel great, but like, this is like a little gym. And like, what if I could like really like do it like this and like make it into like a dance? Like, could this be performance? And can I do it in under 2 minutes? Right? And can I do it before the coffee's ready? And can I do it without being mad and having to do it? What would that?
that's a creative brain, though.
It's a creative brain, right? And I approach pretty much everything with that. And I know it's annoying, actually. And it's very annoying for my daughter. Who's like, not everything's positive. Like, you don't look at the dark side enough. And I was like, I don't want to. And I know that's another kind of denial, and a denial maybe in a healthy sense. Sometimes maybe, sometimes not. Like I'm not gonna sometimes go there because I know it'll just be a deep cavern, and I don't want to go there.
You've been there.
I've been there for sure. Yeah. So I don't find it necessary. Like, yeah, I don't know that is. I guess I have a need for. And maybe this is the art stuff for producing something, even from nothing, even from leaves. Like, how can you make something with nothing?
That's really interesting, because my mind, before you started to go into that, was thinking about the way you think creatively, but also the way you think in abundance. Like, you look around you and you see material, you see art material. Everywhere there is something to create with.
Paul talked about finding creativity and play in his life in small ways. This after having achieved recognition and reward in filmmaking. You'd imagine this was a dream come true for a creative, but for Paul, the trade-off felt too big. The trade-off for the money and recognition was creativity itself.
So in my professional life, as you know, I'm a filmmaker, and I was doing what I thought my value was to tell people what I thought would sell, what would make money, what would look appropriate. And I was making kids' movies, so
You're a producer, right?
as a producer, yeah. So what is appropriate to do for this audience, and more importantly, how to spend other people's money, because the film's very expensive. And at some point, I just got sick of being that kind of appropriate. I just got tired of hearing in my own head what I wanted other people to. That was my value. Like, to be a good producer, you have to present what is good and to steer people away from things which are not appropriate. And over many years, I just got really tired of that. I just felt like I can't do this, but I can't afford to not do it. Do something else. So
That was like peak of your career, right?
yeah, in terms of filmmaking, in terms of making money and making a living.
Yeah. Was it a mix? Like, you were feeling somewhat accomplished creatively, but not quite, but then the rewards were okay for then? Or like, what was it?
Right. You keep getting offered more and more money to do what you do. And so you use that as a kind of driver. You're like, well, I must be good because I'm being offered more money. But at some point, it just feels like enough is enough. And when you realize it, even though you're at the top of your industry, you've hit rock bottom, which is you are a puppet, in a certain way. And you're a very well-paid puppet, but you're still not doing your own thing. So, but then it took, another 15 years, very gradually to figure out what it was to be my own person.
So then from that, you started to rediscover your own creativity and yourself, or?
Yeah.
That's the juicy part. Tell me about that.
I think the process itself is a mystery to me. I couldn't explain to you the steps I took, but it was just a simple way of finding where I felt the most comfortable, where I felt at peace. And it was, sketchbooks, it was meditating in my own way. I think for me, like this idea of allowing yourself to play and to say, well, play is when I get to go on vacation, and play is when I get to play basketball with my friends. And then that's great. But then as you carry that forward, well, then the rest of your life is suffering. Like, I got to work so I can get play in this. I got to talk to my partner so I can play basketball this one time a week, and then she's jealous or whatever. Then it becomes conditional, and then that loses its energy of play. As I get older, I feel like I'm welcoming things as play as they arrive. So one that's been arriving for the last 15 years is this thought around food, like making food, eating food from a place like this, drinking a nice wine. What I love is to go to my fridge and there's 4 things in it, but then all of my spices, and how am I going to create a meal with these 4 things? And making these crazy, wonderful things would not always be tasty, but they're still wonderful. Right, like with Brussels sprouts, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. What I like about these Brussels sprouts is you create this crispiness on the outside, softness on the inside. But what if I added thyme? What if I added 5 spice? What would that create? It's something really interesting. And the fun is not that it be the best you can make. The fun is that you're playing with this food and people are appreciating it. I think as I was coming into this understanding of the value of creativity, I became really excited about the idea of the value of play and the value of that play is kind of entryway into your creativity. If you can play, then you have creativity.
As I listened to Jennifer's and Paul's stories, I realized that I was speaking to professional artists. And while I could relate to what they were saying, I was thinking about my patients who would have a hard time even finding that creative spark in the day-to-day. While the creativity they talked about was humble, I still felt like even to get to that level of play or creative thinking is difficult for most people. What of the rest of us who are struggling to make a living in these systems, who feel that creative energy like a mirage, who can no longer discern where the voices of discouragement are coming from? How can we tap into the simple energy of play and creativity and allow ourselves to make a mess, make mistakes, be vulnerable, and perhaps in the process create some joy and beauty? I thought long and hard about this, and I realized that there is an essential component of creativity missing from our discussion and understanding thus far. This component is so essential that without it, creativity cannot be. And that component is about receiving creativity. So far, we've been focusing on creativity as a process of output, making or creating something, expressing ourselves outwardly. But an indispensable aspect of creativity is input, admiring, being inspired, finding joy, nourishment, wonder, and ideas in someone else's creations. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that creativity is an interdependent, regenerative process of mutual inspiration. Sebastian talked about this and the inspiration that was received from others and the inspiration to give back.
I think I feel a sort of sense of duty to the world about my art and about my stories. I think I have a lot of love to give, and I want to help other people find their own path and situation within themselves. And I think reading other people's art and feeling inspired by that is a really good tool to have. I wouldn't have been so serious about writing if other people hadn't been so magnificent at writing. And so I think I kind of want to continue that legacy of passing my creativity on to other people, because I think that's one of the most effective ways that we can change how people think about creativity and how they think about themselves.
Do you feel that for you, creativity is related to healing?
Yeah, I think that because I think creativity is about getting in touch with who you really are and what you really want. And I think that that's exactly what healing is about too. I think in many ways I want to give as much to the world as possible. Not out of like a martyrdom sense, but just that I want the world to recognize how we all inherently owe and benefit from each other. And I don't think I can say that without being that. And I don't want to say that without being that either. Everything that I feel obligated to do is also something I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've told you this before, but I don't think I could get by doing something I'm not passionate about. My creativity is just like, I want the world to have it, because if anyone can benefit from having it, then someone benefits from having it, you know? The world deserves an abundance of art from all sorts of different perspectives and all different sorts of ideas, especially now. And I think depriving that is something I don't want to do.
Similar to Sebastian, Debbie talked about community and the inspiration she received in relationship to comics.
As a visual arts fan, I was just a fan of illustration. Also, once I went to my first comic book convention in my 20s, it was kind of eye-opening just to meet comic book artists in the flesh, like right in front of me, because they're all, displaying their work, and then you can just talk to them. How often can you do that with your favorite author or your favorite actor or your favorite musician? You can't so much. But in comics, which I thought was unique, is that it's much more of a community. And and being able to, talk to the people that you admire was very awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And that definitely made me feel more in love with the medium. And also it felt more accessible. This is something I could do someday, trying my hand at making my own stories.
And did it feel like, oh, this is just right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it did feel good making the comics. It's kind of interesting, like when you're first starting to make comics, because nobody's reading them yet, especially with your first comic book. It's a very lonely process.
Yeah.
And it isn't until people actually read it that's like, oh, okay, this is part of the process of comics. People have to read it. People have to look at it.
You have to hustle to get that to happen? How do you get that to happen?
The way I really got into it was just exhibiting at the comic convention that I was inspired at, the Alternative Press Expo in San Francisco. 3 years after the first one I attended, that's when I first exhibited and, put out my first maybe 24-page comic book, put it out on the table, had my friends help me with, trying to sell it with me. And for some reason, people picked it up, which was exciting. It's definitely like a turning point in my life, because I felt like it was a time where I was putting myself out there, which was a scary thing for me, because growing up I was always very shy and very much reserved. And when you put yourself out there, you got to turn that off somehow, you got to be able to hustle a bit at least and put your customer service skills on. So yeah, like once that happened, I think I made like $500 in sales, and I was over the moon. It was so exciting for me, and that weekend was like really special to me, because I felt like I grew up a little bit. I learned a little bit more. I met a lot of people just through those conventions.
It was nice to hear Debbie talk about the inspiration and community that she found in comics. And knowing about her education in the fine arts, which didn't include comics at all, I asked her if maybe she found her home in comics because the fine arts is part of an exclusive system that wasn't representative of people of color. She had this to say.
I mean, in general, just the field now, the idea that conceptual art and the field, which it might be my own ignorance, but my idea is that it's run by a lot of highly educated white people.
Fine art?
Mm-hmm. Is that not true?
I don't know. I'm not in that world anymore, or I don't know if I ever was in.
But maybe even back then.
I mean, yeah, I have this very stereotypical view of fine art now, of a fine artist. Again, it's not my realm, so I might be ignorant too, I don't know how many people of color are successful in the art world. I can think of, I mean, like in the 80s, there was Basquiat and Keith Haring. Oh, no, Keith Haring was white. Yeah, I can't think of too many off the top of my head.
And if that has something to do with that feeling of inaccessibility, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in the comics world, plenty of people of color, plenty of women who are in this field. And especially nowadays, a lot of the comics these days are not so much about like fantasy or fiction. There's so many that are about their own stories. People sharing their own pain or, you know, whatever experience that they're having. And I feel like there's a comic for like every marginalized, almost every marginalized person in this world, which is neat, you know. More and more stories about mental illness and anxiety for kids. More and more. It's definitely becoming way more prevalent. Huge number of comics about transgender, non-binary, just gender issues in general. A ton of that coming out for young people too, and for adults too. So comics is definitely becoming, you know, it makes it so much more accessible for people to tell those stories, but also for people to access those stories too, which is, again, another neat thing and why I always try to advocate for comics.
It made me happy to hear about the comic world, how there's a community of artists that represent many different ways of being and that generously share work and creativity with each other. It felt like the creation and flourishing of such a community happens outside of the dominant systems, and it gave me hope and encouragement that although we are affected by these larger systems, we can find a way to nourish our creativity and share with one another our own creative passions. And for me, coming to the light bulb moment, realizing that an indispensable part of the creative process is input, and experiencing and partaking in creativity from others, that it's essential to the process. That gave me insight as to why I was feeling stagnant and burnt out as of late, realizing that my output often outweighs my input. So in that moment, I put things on pause and set out to fill my own gas tank of creative inspiration. I took walks by the ocean, immersing myself in the ultimate source of creativity, nature. And as I walked, I saw seaweed and remembered Jennifer sharing with me her amazing project at Open Labs, harvesting seaweed to do all kinds of things, including art. I also picked up Debbie's book, Bumper Boy Loses His Marbles, and read it cover to cover in awe. I have to admit that I never gave comics much attention before, but what I found in those pages was a world of wonder and delight as I found myself literally laughing out loud. What a world Debbie created with what seemed like a few simple line drawings and an imaginative cast of characters. I also thought about what Paul said and just played in my way, playing with my dogs and silly games with my kids and going thrift store shopping to be inspired by the fashions I found there. After just a few days, my gas tank felt full and I was ready to work with renewed inspiration. And here's the finished work of art from an entirely interdependent, community-inspired collaboration. I hope this program inspires and powers and heals. I hope it connects you to your own creative life force. I hope you will join us in this creative community and creative life and see all around you creativity and inspiration and share with us your own creativity. And if you need some inspiration, you can check out Debbie Huey's work at bumperboy.net Jennifer Parker's work at openlabresearch.com, Sebastian Snow's writing at ricespicemag.com, Paul Wong's eclectic art at oaklandpaul.myportfolio.com, and check out Melody Kopp's beautiful ceramics at Berkeley Community Acupuncture. Thank you, Joan, for your beautiful cello music and everyone who shared with me your creative world. Special thanks to our talented engineer, Daniel Burgess, and thank you to Poddington Bear from soundofpicture.com for this episode's music. There's creativity all around. We live in an abundant and creative world. If you are inspired by this program of You Are Medicine, spread the word to your friends and family and visit bcaclinic.com/You Are Medicine for more information.